Somewhere in a snowy Montana wheat field, a fighter jet once landed itself. No pilot, no hands on the stick, just a multimillion-dollar Air Force interceptor, gliding down out of the sky and setting itself down in the snow, engine still running, as if it had simply decided all on its own that this quiet patch of farmland was exactly where it belonged. This is not a legend. This really happened. More than 50 years later, it remains one of those stories that seems to defy the basic logic of flight itself. It's February 2nd, 1970. A Convair F-106 Delta Dart, one of the fastest, most advanced interceptors America ever built, a needle-nosed dart of a jet capable of more than 1,500 miles an hour, is flying an air combat training exercise out of Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. It's the kind of flight that happens all the time, the sort of exercise that fills the logbooks of fighter squadrons across the country. At the controls is First Lieutenant Gary Foust, an Air Force pilot running through demanding maneuvers in a jet he trusted with his life. There is nothing on paper that should make this flight any different from the exercises that came before it. Then, in the middle of a hard training maneuver, everything changes in an instant. The jet departs controlled flight and slips into a flat spin. If you've never heard that term, here's what it means. Instead of diving nose first, where a pilot has at least a fighting chance to recover, the plane starts flattening out and spinning nearly level, like a leaf caught in the wind, with the horizon sweeping past the canopy again and again. It's one of the most dangerous positions an aircraft can be in. The controls may stop producing the response the pilot needs, and the ground gets closer with every rotation. Foust fights the spin with the recovery procedures he'd been trained to use. Nothing works. The F-106 keeps spinning, losing altitude, the Montana landscape wheeling beneath him in dizzying, repeating circles. He even deploys the drag chute on the advice of an instructor pilot flying nearby, but it wraps around the tail and fails to stop the spin. Every second that passes, the margin for a safe recovery shrinks a little further. With the plane descending toward the earth and still out of control, he makes the only call left. He ejects, trusting his life to a parachute rather than a machine that stopped listening to him. Punching out of a jet in a flat spin is violent. The forces involved in an ejection are brutal on the body, even in the best of circumstances. A jolt that rattles bones and muscle in a fraction of a second, but Foust's parachute deploys, and he drifts down into the Montana winter, cold air rushing past him, snow-covered ground rising slowly to meet him, watching helplessly as his aircraft spins away without him, seemingly doomed. Except it doesn't hit the ground. Here's the part that still amazes people more than 50 years later. Before ejecting, Foust had activated the takeoff trim setting during his recovery attempts, leaving the controls trimmed for wings-level flight at roughly 175 knots. Then the ejection changed the aircraft's balance, configuration, and aerodynamics. In a machine balanced as precisely as a fighter jet, small changes can matter enormously. Whatever the exact combination, it was enough. The empty F-106, with no one left inside it to fly it, recovered from the flat spin, leveled its wings, and settled into a stable glide, all without a single hand on the controls. Still under power, with the throttle set the way Foust had left it before he ejected, the jet headed off on its own across the Montana landscape, flying straight and level as Foust descended beneath his parachute. And then came the truly astonishing part. It lowered itself toward a snow-covered field near the small town of Big Sandy and made a wheels-up belly landing, skidding through the snow before coming to a stop in a farmer's field, engine still running, as if it had simply decided to land there and go to sleep, indifferent to the fact that no one was left aboard to guide it down. Not a fireball, not a crater, not the twisted wreckage anyone would expect from an out-of-control jet crashing to Earth. The landing was gentle enough to leave the wings intact and the aircraft repairable. There was real damage underneath, including a long gash in the belly, but nothing like the total destruction anyone would have predicted. When a local law enforcement officer reached the pilotless jet, its engine and even its radar scope were still operating. The engine was allowed to run until it exhausted its fuel, an hour and 45 minutes after the landing. The press couldn't resist a story like that, and a legend was born. the Cornfield Bomber, even though technically it came down in a wheat field, not a cornfield, and it was an interceptor built for chasing down enemy aircraft, not a bomber at all. Facts aside, the nickname stuck anyway, and it's still what most people call it today, more than half a century later, passed down through aviation circles and Air Force lore as one of those tales too good and too strange not to repeat. And the story doesn't end in that field. Air Force recovery crews partially disassembled the aircraft, moved it to a nearby rail line, and shipped it to California for repairs. That same aircraft, the plane that had spun toward the Earth with no one at the controls and then landed itself, went right back into active service. It continued serving for years in California and New York, its strange history following it through the rest of its career. Think about the chain of circumstances that had to come together. The F-106's trim had been set for a stable, wings-level glide. Then the ejection changed the aircraft enough to break the spin. Delta-winged airframe recovered, held a stable attitude, and met a broad, snow-covered field with its landing gear still raised. Engineering played an unmistakable part. The aircraft's controls, trim, and aerodynamics behaved in a way that made its survival possible. But so did an extraordinary run of luck. Together they turned what should have been a fatal plunge for the aircraft into one of the strangest landings in aviation history. Eventually, after years of further service, this one-of-a-kind aircraft earned a permanent home at the National Museum of the United States Air Force near Dayton, Ohio, where it sits today in the Cold War Gallery, officially remembered by its nickname, the Cornfield Bomber, the plane that flew itself. Visitors can walk up to the sleek delta-winged jet, looking over the same aircraft that once slid across a Montana wheat field, and many may have no idea that this exact machine, serial number 58-0787, once flew unmanned across the Montana sky and settled into a snowy field with damage the Air Force was able to repair. It's one of those stories that sounds too strange to be true, the kind of thing you'd expect to hear as tall-tale folklore around a hangar rather than as documented history. And yet there it is, aluminum and steel, sitting in a museum as proof that it really happened. No exaggeration required. Sometimes the most incredible chapters in American history aren't written by people alone. Sometimes they're written by a remarkable machine, a pilot's last control inputs, and a run of luck so improbable that the result still sounds like legend.